Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation.
The San Francisco 49ers select Trey Lance.
Yeah, that didn't work. Yep, the Trey Lance experiment is finally done in San Francisco. After the 49ers gave up 2 future first-round picks in 2022 and 2023, and a third-round pick, in order to draft a quarterback out of North Dakota State that had thrown just 318 passes in college and just 322 passes in high school, meaning that he had thrown 640 career passes, or less than some NFL quarterbacks throw in one single season. As it turns out, shocker, Lance was not ready enough or good enough to play quarterback. He showed little improvement from year 1 to the preseason to year 3. And now, the experiment is finally over, as the 49ers just traded him to the Dallas Cowboys in exchange for a 4th-round pick. The projected franchise quarterback was dumped for a day 3 pick before the start of his 3rd season. For some perspective on how bad Lance was and how little he did with the 49ers, a while ago, I did a video on a game between the Oakland Raiders and the Buffalo Bills from 1969. You can learn more about that game by clicking the card in the upper right corner. In the first half of that game, Raiders quarterback Darryl LaMonica threw 6 touchdown passes. He threw more touchdown passes in the first half of that one game than Trey Lance threw in his entire time with the 49ers. Think about that. In a 30-minute stretch, a man did more than Lance did in 2 whole seasons, even though said man was acquired for one of the biggest draft trade hauls of all time. Obviously, we can now officially say it. Even though Trey Lance could still turn things around, when it comes to his actual draft status and living up to it, he's a massive bust. The pick gets a giant F, and was one of the biggest whiffs at the number 3 overall pick ever, especially considering the haul that they gave up in order to acquire him. There's some stiff competition for bad 3rd overall picks. Deion Jordan was drafted 3rd overall in 2013, and the Oregon defensive end posted just 3 sacks in his time with the Miami Dolphins. That was a waste, in a wasteland of a draft. Trent Richardson was drafted 3rd overall and played just 1 season with the Cleveland Browns. When the Kansas City Chiefs chose defensive end Tyson Jackson 3rd overall in 2009, I'm sure they expected that he would finish his career with more than 9 sacks. And the Lions struck out pretty hard in 2002 when they chose Joey Harrington 3rd overall, and you can learn more about him by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But if you really think about it, in all likelihood, Trey Lance is the biggest bust at the number 3 overall pick since, well, this guy right here, Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Akili Smith. And what you might not know is just how similar the career of Trey Lance was, now that his time in San Francisco is officially done, to the career of Akili Smith. And it goes well beyond the fact that the 2 men were both 3rd overall picks and were massive busts at the quarterback position. The comparisons between the 2 men are, quite frankly, absolutely scary, to the point where their careers were almost identical. And today, we're going to break it down, because you might not realize how, in more ways than one, Trey Lance was deja vu all over again, from the same mistake the Bengals made more than 2 decades before. Let's start with the obvious. Both men were quarterbacks drafted 3rd overall in their respective draft, with Smith getting drafted 3rd in 1999, and Lance getting drafted 3rd in 2021. However, you probably knew that already. As the video goes on, the comparisons get more and more freaky, because their careers were virtually identical. There are 2 interesting things with both players in terms of how they got drafted. Number 1, both teams got a heck of a lot of flack for the haul used to acquire the player, because part of why these busts are remembered in particular is because of what these teams gave up. For the 49ers, as mentioned before, they gave up 2 future first-round picks and a third-round pick. For the Bengals, they gave up, quite literally, an entire draft class. Quite infamously, during the 1999 draft, the New Orleans Saints were trying to trade up to acquire Texas running back Ricky Williams. Eventually, New Orleans made a trade with Washington, where the Saints gave up their entire draft class, giving up a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh, and gave up 2 future picks in 2000 in the first and the third round, so that they could get Williams. However, before New Orleans made the trade with Washington, they tried making an even better trade with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals were offered all of New Orleans' draft picks, so 5 in total, plus the pick swap in the first round, plus a first rounder in 2000, a first rounder in 2001, and a second rounder in 2002. And the Bengals, in pursuit of Akili Smith, said no. The Bengals could have received 8 additional draft picks, with 2 of them being in the first round, and they turned it down because they love Smith so much. So much for that. But number 2, both Lance and Smith, despite being the 3rd overall pick, were the 3rd quarterback taken. The 1999 and 2021 classes were the only 2 times in the last half-century that quarterbacks started the draft 1, 2, 3. In 1999, Tim Couch went first, followed by Donovan McNabb, and followed by Akili Smith. And in 2021, Trevor Lawrence went first, followed by Zach Wilson, and followed by Trey Lance. The circumstances in which both Lance and Smith were drafted were nearly identical. The teams in question gave him a ton of ammo, and franchise-altering ammo, I might add, giving up 2 first-round picks in order to draft the 3rd quarterback at number 3. Pretty bizarre, but again, this is only how they got into the NFL. Once in the NFL, the comparisons somehow get even crazier. In Trey Lance's time with the 49ers, he threw a grand total of 5 touchdown passes. That was it. Guess how many touchdown passes Akili Smith threw in his time with the Bengals? You guessed it. 5. Both Trey Lance and Akili Smith finished their careers with the same number of touchdown passes. But the stats go beyond there, because the touchdowns were evenly split for both men. Trey Lance threw 5 touchdown passes, with those touchdowns coming against 3 opponents. He threw at least 1 touchdown against the Seattle Seahawks, the Houston Texans, and the Detroit Lions. Akili Smith threw 5 touchdown passes, with those touchdowns coming against, amazingly enough, 3 opponents, splitting these touchdowns between the Cleveland Browns, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Miami Dolphins. That is a bit bizarre. Speaking of bizarre, both Akili Smith and Trey Lance could supposedly run the football well. We've spoken about their arms, and we'll get back to that in just a bit. But now, let's talk about their legs. Over his entire career with the Bengals, Akili Smith ran for 1 rushing touchdown, with that touchdown coming off of the bench at home in his rookie season. Trey Lance, over his entire career with the 49ers, ran for 1 rushing touchdown, with that touchdown coming off of the bench at home in his rookie season. But it gets even crazier than that, because the touchdowns were identical. Trey Lance's touchdown run came from 1 yard out in a loss to the Green Bay Packers, who ended the 2021 season as the number 1 seed in the NFC after finishing the year with 13 wins. Akili Smith's touchdown run? That came from 1 yard out in a loss to the St. Louis Rams, who ended the 1999 season as the number 1 seed in the NFC after finishing the year, you guessed it, with 13 wins. Just to recap, both men scored 1 rushing touchdown with the team that drafted them, with that touchdown coming off of the bench from 1 yard out at home in a loss to the number 1 seed in the NFC. Well, that's a bit odd, isn't it? Just you wait, because the stats get even crazier. Both Smith and Lance made their debut in week 1 of their rookie season off of the bench in a road game against another team in their same conference, and a team that had never made it to the Super Bowl before at the time. And they did it on the exact same day. For Smith and the Bengals, it was against the Tennessee Titans on September 12, 1999. For Lance and the 49ers, it was against the Detroit Lions on September 12, 2021. Seriously, the same exact day. And if that's not bizarre enough, both men, in their first game ever, finished it completing 1 pass. Lance threw for 5 yards, while Smith threw for 11 yards. So they started their careers off in identical fashion, because of course they did. In fact, both men also made the first starts of their career in Week 5 on October 10th, with Smith doing it against the Cleveland Browns on October 10th, 1999, and Lance doing it against the Arizona Cardinals on October 10th, 2021. So both men did it against a divisional opponent in the same exact week on the same exact day. And don't worry, it's about to get even more absurd. Over his entire career with the 49ers, Trey Lance played in 8 games and had 797 yards passing, coming out to 99.6 yards per game. Over his entire career with the Bengals, Akili Smith played in 22 games and had 2,212 yards, coming out to 100.5 yards per game. That's right. The two men, in terms of yards per game, were separated by less than a yard. If you round down at the 5s to the nearest yard, they're both at 100 yards on the dot, because of course they are. Even when you look at their career best game from a passing yardage perspective and a passing touchdown perspective, it is just about identical. The most touchdowns that Lance ever threw for in a game came when he threw 2 touchdown passes against the Seattle Seahawks on October 3rd, 2021, and in a game against the Houston Texans on January 2nd, 2022. The most touchdowns that Smith ever threw for in a game came when he threw 2 touchdown passes on October 10th, 1999, in a game against the Cleveland Browns, meaning that both men had 2 touchdown passes as their career high. But in terms of yards, the most yards that Lance ever threw for in a game came on January 2nd, 2022, when he threw for 249 yards against the Houston Texans. The most yards that Smith ever threw for in a game came on September 10th, 2000, when in a game against the Cleveland Browns, he threw for 250 yards. 250 to 249. Just to break it down, both men have the same number of passing yards per game over their career with their respective drafted teams. Both men had the same career best game from a touchdown perspective. And both men had, for all intents and purposes, the same career best scheme from a passing yard standpoint, with the 2 men separated in that department by 1 whole yard. That is it. And you can sense when both men were given the keys to start their second season that something was off. For Akili Smith, the Bengals named him the starter for the opening day of the 2000 season. In that game, the Bengals lost to the Browns, with the offense scoring just 1 touchdown and losing by multiple possessions, as Smith threw 1 more interception than touchdown. And for Trey Lance, the 49ers named him the starter for opening day of the 2022 season. In that game, the 49ers lost to the Bears, with the offense scoring just 1 touchdown and losing by multiple possessions, as Lance threw 1 more interception than touchdown. Not only did their rookie seasons on opening day start off the same, but their sophomore seasons on opening day started off the same as well. Same team result, same differential of touchdowns minus interceptions, and same number of offensive touchdowns scored. Oh, and neither man threw a single pass over the final month of their sophomore season. so it ended on just as sour of a note as it started. And finally, at the end of the day, football is all about winning. A lot can be forgiven if you win games. And safe to say, neither Akili Smith nor Trey Lance were able to do that. Because both men, as a starting quarterback, won games against two opponents. That's it. For Smith, he defeated the Cleveland Browns and the Denver Broncos. And for Lance, he defeated the Houston Texans and the Seattle Seahawks. This also means that both quarterbacks won a game against one team in their division and one team outside of their division in the AFC. And in an even crazier thing, of the few wins that both men had, one of them, they had to do absolutely nothing in and completed just 2 passes. For Smith, in a win against the Denver Broncos where Corey Dillon ran wild, he got the win despite completing just 2 passes. For Lance, in a win against the Seattle Seahawks, he got credit for the win despite completing just 2 passes. Granted, the circumstances for that win were vastly different, seeing as he was knocked out with an injury. But still, both men beat 2 separate opponents as a starting quarterback, and one of the wins was a game where they completed 2 passes on the dot. That is freaky. Now look, obviously, Trey Lance's career is not done. Where he fits in with the Cowboys, seeing as Cooper Rush is the number 2 quarterback and he's pretty good, and he's under contract until 2024, which is the same year that Trey Lance's contract expires, I'm not sure, but obviously, Trey Lance can go on and have a very successful career in the NFL. His job is not done yet, and he could have a way better career than Akili Smith had. And there are some quarterbacks that were busts that just need a change in scenery, and everything falls into place. Look at guys like Jim Plunkett, Brett Favre, and Vinny Testaverde, just to name a few. Guys that all flamed out with their first team that went on to have pretty successful careers in the NFL, if I do say so myself. But at least for his time with the 49ers, yeah, he was basically just Akili Smith 2.0, which is not very good to say the least. So just to recap everything that we've covered, because it's a lot, both Smith and Lance were drafted 3rd overall as the 3rd quarterback in the draft, with the drafted teams giving up a ton of ammo in order to acquire him. Both men threw 5 passing touchdowns in their career and ran for 1. Both men averaged 100 passing yards per game, and their career best game threw for 2 touchdowns and 250 yards. Both men opened up their rookie season off of the bench by completing 1 pass in a road game. Both men threw their touchdowns against 3 separate opponents, and ran for their 1 touchdown against the number 1 seed in the NFC from 1 yard out in a losing effort. Both men lost their sophomore season opener by scoring just 1 touchdown on the road. Both men didn't play toward the end of their 2nd season. Both men made their first career start against a divisional opponent on the same exact day. And both men beat 2 separate opponents, one in their division and one out of division in the AFC, with one of the wins being a game where they completed only 2 passes. Are we sure Trey Lance isn't just Akili Smith reincarnated? Because when you really break it down, the careers of 2021 draft bust Trey Lance and 1999 draft bust Akili Smith were identical. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.